he had to admit, there were 3 advantages for Caesar in Ravenna. 1, it was in his safe territory, Cisalpine Gaul, a long-standing supporter of his. 2, it was very close to the coast road and to the border with Italia proper, and so very handy for communication. 3, no one in their right mind would seek to attack him there. And given the vast swathe of enemies the general had picked up in his time, the last was always worthy of consideration. And as for communication, well, that had certainly come into play over the winter, endless toing and froing of messengers to Rome, to friends, enemies, and those neutral folk playing their dangerous game. Actually, it was much the same conversation going on over and over again, and just over a week ago Caesar had sent his latest proposal, his latest last chance that both he and Pompey lay down their commands and put their fate in the hands of the Roman people. Of course, Caesar was the darling of the population, while Pompey could call on the Senate's backing, so there was little chance the fat, knob-nosed old psychopath would allow those terms to be agreed. Behind Fronto, Hortensius snorted. "Need a hand there, Marcus?" "No, thank you," he snapped back as he skittered on along the damp timbers toward their destination. The new year had begun only days ago, and winter still gripped Cisalpine Gaul in her glittering, chilly hand. Nothing was safe to walk on, sit on, or stand on. Ahead stood the only part of Ravenna that could be considered any sort of hub, where a tiny forum square was surrounded by important-looking buildings, which meant that they didn't lean too much. The largest of these buildings, a basilica of sorts, had been taken on by Caesar as his headquarters while in the city. The nobles and mercantile class of the place had fawned around their proconsul, granting his every wish, and so most of this central island was temporarily under his command. Of course, they fawned after the general largely because he was here, and with a legion close enough to smell the boot oil and the late-night farting contests. Fronto had no doubt that had Caesar been away for a while, their vocal opinions would change a great deal. They would be less respectful about a man who was these days often seen as opposed to the authority of the Roman Senate. Fronto wondered what was said behind closed doors, and how many of them kept a knife by the bed, just in case. The smoke pouring from the flues around the large building's roof at least suggested that the place would be warm, which was more than could be said for the house that Fronto, Galronus, and Mascova shared. Galronus would be there already, as would most of them. Fronto would be late, of course, but there was a level of tradition to keep up here after all. If he were to be on time for Caesar's meetings, the old man would expect it on every occasion. Besides, he could blame Hortensius this time. He was intrigued, though. It would be nice to see Brutus again. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus was one of the few men on Caesar's staff throughout most of the past decade who Fronto felt he could trust implicitly and liked unreservedly. He'd missed Brutus's company since the younger man had been off in Rome conveying messages and carrying out duties, both official and less than official, on behalf of the general. News of Brutus's arrival at Ravenna had set tongues wagging in the past hour. The small square was largely empty at this early hour, and the air clear and crisp, since the sun was yet to climb high enough to warm the lagoons and marshes and release the clouds of mist that would envelop Ravenna for most of the morning. 2 of Caesar's Praetorian guardsmen stood at the door of the large building, though they did not move to stop Fronto and Hortensius. Normally, Fronto would challenge them on their lack of care in letting anyone pass without a password, but they were late, and he knew Caesar well enough to know that the man had likely given the guards specific orders to chivvy him on. Sure enough, as he entered the large hall with its twin rows of pillars and its statue at the far end that supposedly represented Jupiter, but looked to Fronto suspiciously like many of the statues he had seen in Gaul, the staff of Caesar's province and army were all gathered. "Good of you to join us, Fronto,"